surprisingly, the story begins not 35 years ago, but like 15-ish years ago. I was in my late 20s, working construction, ran my own business, doing my thing, but was somewhat unfulfilled. And financially, I was compensated for it, so it wasn't that. And I was in a relationship at that point with my wife. We still are. We've added some kids to the mix, but just something seemed out of whack, out of place. And two things happened in perfect congruence that changed my life. The first was on a Sunday morning church service. Someone was the pastor talking about using your talents. And I just being super real. I mean, hey, here we go, guys, being real with you. I'd always felt like I received one talent. I was burned as a kid. I know we'll talk about that in a moment. I lost my fingers, which set me apart and set me below the majority of everybody else. I struggled in school. I struggled with focus, ADHD, undiagnosed, but man, I have it in spades. So I never really had the talents that so many of my other colleagues and friends and even family members had. And then in church on this Sunday, the pastor was talking about, it does not matter if you've received 5 or 3 or 1 talent, gifts. Use them well, multiply. And for a long time, I recognized my one talent for what it was, but I also recognized I had buried it. And so I'm hearing this guy really trying to convict me on, does not matter, use what you have to multiply, to make a difference for those around you in your community. And then on Tuesday that week, I'm working in front of a pickup truck downtown for the folks in St. Louis. I'm in Soulard, man. So I'm in Soulard in front of a pickup truck with a thing of blueprints in front of me, and my phone rings. So I flip it open, and there's a little girl on the other side, and she says, "Mr. O'Leary?" So I say back to her, "Oh, let me get you my dad's number." And her response was, No. I just called your daddy. He gave me yours. Mr. O'Leary, would you share your story with my school? And Nick, I'd never told anybody my story, the one you asked me about a moment ago. I never had an interest in telling anybody my story. Why would you talk about being burned? Yeah. Why would you talk about amputations? Why would you talk about scars and brokenness and lesslessness and worldliness, like just all these things that set you below everybody else? So I never told a soul how I was burned. And then that day, on the heels of that sermon with this little girl on the flip phone, I said a couple words, well, one word that began to change my life, and I think it would change your listeners. Yes. It's like, dude, we get it. Yes. No. I'm serious. In saying yes to the limitless promise of your life and opportunities and serving the one in front of you, everything begins to change for better. So I said yes to this little girl, practiced this talk for 40 hours, stood in front of a group of these little monsters, all 3 Girl Scouts in the room, man, stood behind the podium, an introverted, broken, lousy motivational speaker looking down at his notes. But my first talk was not in front of the group where you met me a couple of years later, or in front of Southwest Airlines or Microsoft or some big organization. The first talk, when I pressed 1 to serve, was in front of 3 third-grade Girl Scouts. And one of those little Girl Scouts had a dad who was a Rotarian. And he said, "John, that was epic, man. Would you share that in front of my Rotary Club?" And we're not too deep, but there is no compensation. There's no limelight. There are no podcasters saying, "Dude, you got to share the story of the Girl Scouts and the Rotary." No one cares. No one really cared about the work I was doing. But I was doing it because I was motivated to touch the one in front of me well, to really uplift their life through some lessons I had learned in mine. And so it led from there into 3, and then the following year, 12, the following year, 36, the following year, financially, it started to pivot a little bit. So we started to turn this thing into a business, but it was always mission led. It was always, how do we serve and elevate the one in front of us? How do we change the world one life at a time, starting with our own? And over the last 15 years of doing this, we've been in front of a couple million people and a couple million more virtually, and have had some really cool honors. So now the question is, well, what the heck are you talking about with these organizations and those 3 Girl Scouts and every other club? What are you saying yes to now? I'm saying yes to this tragic story that befell me as a kid. When I was 9, this goes back to your original question, I witnessed boys in my neighborhood playing with fire and gasoline, and just assumed if these kids can get away with it, man, press 1, me too. So that weekend, I walked into my parents' garage, bent over a can of gas, held a piece of cardboard on fire, try to pour the gasoline toward the flame. And before the liquid even came out, the fumes. Because in life, it's not the liquid that burns you. It's not the headlines that burn us. It's the vapor. I think it's one of the reasons why pausing in life to listen to worthy podcasts, Nick, like yours, to read, to pray, to connect, to network, why it's so important. Because otherwise we do life in an echo chamber. So it's not the liquid that's going to burn you. It's not the headlines. It's the fumes. That day, those fumes came out, created a huge explosion, pushed me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, set my world on fire, and changed me permanently. One moment, I'm a happy little fella. And then the next, I found myself with burns on 100% of my body, 87% third degree, dying. So when you ask the question, what's the story from 35 years ago? That's it. But you would have never heard it. I had a whole lot of things not happened, including a little boy saying yes at age 28 to a Girl Scout, saying, man, I guess I'll share to 3.
So